Hello and welcome to another episode of the Opportunity Podcast. I'm your host, Gregory Alfring, the head of marketing over here at Empire Flippers. And today I am interviewing Mike Swigunski, very old and dear friend of mine. Swig and I actually joined EF at the exact same time, like 8 years ago. Now, our careers have diverged a little bit because Swig actually left the company a few years back to go and become his own entrepreneur. And a big way he did that was entrepreneurship through acquisition. So in this podcast, Swig and I detail all the crazy stuff that he did, specifically with this one business he bought from us about a year ago. And he has seen crazy growth. He's been able to 4x the growth. And a lot of the stuff he's done to this business that he bought is all the stuff I tell buyers to do all the time. They're organic stuff. So this is a fantastic podcast. If you're looking for a way, just a simple roadmap, like how do I go and acquire a business and how do I go and grow that business? Because like you just spent all the money, you want to grow, right? This is going to be a fantastic podcast for you guys out there. Swig is a super sharp dude, but everything he recommends here is not rocket science. A lot of the businesses that you're looking at on our marketplace, you can acquire and do the same stuff Swig did. And in less than a year, you might just be sitting pretty just like Swig, or maybe not, it is risk. But anyways, I'll stop talking. We'll get into it. We'll let Swig take the show. See you on the other side. I got Mike Swig with me here. Our long reunion has at last come again, my old friend. But welcome to the podcast. For everyone that doesn't know your esteemed legacy, my friend, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so great to be on here, Greg. And yeah, it's been long overdue, man. I think the first Empire Flippers podcast we were on together was back in 2016 when we were just sitting in Saigon, passing a microphone around, kind of like impromptu. So yeah, it's been really good to kind of reconnect. And there's been a lot that's happened, I think, for both of us in that time. So I guess the 30-second overview is that I'm an author and entrepreneur. I've built a small portfolio of software businesses and have helped other people kind of as an acquisition advisor. So a pretty interesting kind of segue into the space, I guess, is like there's a lot of first-time buyers and first-time sellers who just need a little bit more hand-holding. And so I've kind of found a little bit of a niche within the niche, so to speak. But overall, staying busy bootstrapping my own businesses and then also acquiring and building my own portfolio.
Man, that brings back memory lanes, that podcast. I totally forgot about that. So for the audience out there listening in, if you didn't catch it, Swig and I used to work together at Empire Flippers. We were both employees number 4 and 5, and we could argue who's 4, who's 5, because we literally got hired at the same time. Like we like shared rooms basically for months when we first began.
It's
And
like two
yeah,
twins arguing who was born first.
yeah, exactly. Well, I'm a Gemini zodiac sign, so we're just the two bodies, same soul, my friend. So same
Yeah,
person, right? Twins.
love it.
But yeah, man, that brings me back. That's like almost 8 years ago when I left the oil field. And I think you were in New Zealand before, right? You were doing the whole like travel startup, right?
Yeah, so I'd worked at a kind of a small tech startup there. They ran out of money and I traveled for 2 months. I like spent a month hitchhiking the South Island in New Zealand and essentially started running out of money and then saw like the advertisement and job opening for Empire Flippers and basically applied and then flew out to Vietnam to kind of get things started.
Yeah, so Swig and I worked together for years at EF before you finally left. So before we get into what I really want to talk to you about today, which is this amazing acquisition you made not too long ago, why don't you give us a little bit of the details of like your transition from, working here at Empire Flippers to going out on your own business? And if you don't mind, please sing praise about our spaghetti article on your travel
Oh,
website. That is your number one article for sure. That's
yeah,
why it's
fast food spaghetti in the Philippines. So if you go
yeah.
to the Philippines, you got to try out the fast food spaghetti challenge, which is like going to McDonald's, Jollibee, Wendy's, and a few of the other places and trying the infamous fast food spaghetti. But yeah, as far as like kind of a brief overview of like what happened, like Greg mentioned, started in 2016 at Empire Flippers. and honestly just loved things there, but always had like a passion for kind of doing my own stuff. I had built a travel blog before and was really into like travel writing and photography and stuff. And in 2018, I published a book called Global Career: How to Work Anywhere and Travel Forever, which essentially was a practical guide on how you can travel and still kind of like work remotely, grow your career, and still have like a fairly decent income. And so in 2018, launched that, had built a few other things, like a few other offers around it. In 2019, I acquired my first kind of small software business, and that started doing pretty well, and was able to get my investment back in under 8 months. So it was like really, I guess, meta, working at Empire Flippers, seeing all these businesses doing well and being like, okay, you're kind of playing into it. Like, this is a great industry, it's a great investment, but hey, like, why not double down on something that we're preaching, we're marketing about this industry? Why can't, I do that and also, walk the walk, right? So it was cool to kind of acquire a software business, get my investment back in 8 months. It's been a very passive, great investment. And so that just kind of opened the can of worms like, okay, why don't I just keep doing this, but on a larger scale? And that's kind of where it brought me, is after exiting Empire Flippers in 2020, building up my own offers, but also like stacking some money to have a future kind of acquisition. And that kind of brings us to like the SaaS acquisition I had.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you did that on the side because that's something I always wanted other people to do at EF. Like that was back when we were allowed to do it, right? Before the side project policy. Though now we're allowed to do it again. So like everything's come
Yeah.
full circle. But yeah, like I think that's great because you a lot of people they view acquisitions and like, oh my God, it's like this massive thing, but you started off like very, very small, right? So like you can start small and build up through this like big complex beast down the road, but you don't have to start at the complexity, right? So
Right.
yeah, I think that's a cool journey. But yeah, let's fast forward to your acquisition because I think this is probably, I would imagine, probably one of your best acquisitions you've done considering what happened. So talk to me a bit about like why did you go to acquire the SaaS business? Like why SaaS businesses first, and then what was it about this specific business that you bought? Maybe give us before you answer that question, maybe give us just like a brief detail of the actual deal itself so it gives context to the audience.
Yeah, so this business was listed for about half a mil on Empire Flippers, and the reason that I love this space, like I think between 500K to 750K is like this weird sort of like no man's land. It's too big for solopreneurs, and it's like too small for any like the big portfolio buyers. So it really is kind of this sweet spot that kind of can offer a buyer a little bit of strategic leverage to negotiate a good deal. And this deal in particular was, it had been on the marketplace for a while. It was a bit complex. I think a lot of buyers had kind of overlooked it because it was based in the Netherlands. It was a unique software, almost like a big portion of the traffic and customers were like outside of the US. And so it kind of was a complicated thing. And the reason I was looking at deals is I have an acquisition program where I help first time buyers. So one of my buyers had actually performed the due diligence. I had done weeks of due diligence on this deal. They passed on it just because it didn't fit their buyers' criteria, their other investors. It just wasn't really the structure they wanted. But I had really dug deep into this business, and I kind of had a strategic partner who was structured in Europe, could really like help with that side of things. And so we just had this like really good synergy between, hey, this acquisition looks great. I think the seller is willing to like negotiate a bit. They were just been working on the business for 10 years and were kind of ready to be done with it. So it was just one of those things where it was the right deal, but it was the right deal for the right people, right? Where we just had a little bit of good, I don't know, synergy between the two of our skill sets to make the deal happen. And as far as like why I love software, I think again it has the biggest moat out of any business model. So you look at any of the other business models with FBA, e-commerce, drop shipping, content sites, again, people can kind of replicate that a lot faster and for a lot cheaper. With software, This person had been building this business for 10 years. The type of software that it's built on usually ranges between $80 to $100 per hour for a good developer. So for us to try to build this software from scratch, if we're going at a very fast pace with a big team, would have likely cost about the same or more than what we acquired it for. And on top of that, there's a lot of other things where the SEO rankings are around. There's not a lot of other competitors in the niche. So there was all these other kind of like moats. It was like a moat around a moat around a moat that I really loved about this type of software business. And I think in general, software businesses tend to have bigger moats because of that, because it is quite expensive to replicate a software and then also to get the marketing strategy kind of replicated. So I think that answers the questions, but happy to go a little bit more extensive.
No, that's perfect, man. I mostly agree with that, though. I think AI is changing a bit of the moat equation on SaaS front, but I think that's still mostly true, right? Like, that's the thing people never think about, right? Like, oh, why would someone buy this business when they can just go build it themselves? Like, well, yeah, but you're also not taking in the fact that this business already has customers and it already has marketing that's actually working. We're going to dive a little bit into some of the business stuff because the changes you did to the business, I think, are really fascinating, which will highlight why this was in a lot of ways such a good opportunity. But you mentioned how this was in Netherlands, so it was all written in, not English. The entire website wasn't English. So talk to me a bit about that, because like we recently started selling, so that site must have come about right when we allowed foreign sites onto the marketplace. Because before, as you know, like if it wasn't in
Yeah.
English, we just wouldn't do the deal. But I remember getting hit up by people at conferences all the time. I think Niels was the one who finally like broke the camel's back, where
Yeah.
he's like, "Please let me sell my like non-English sites with you guys." So I finally convinced Justin and Joe to like let us do it, right? So it must have been around that time. But talk to me, like, how did you get over that language barrier? Like, why was that not a detractor for you, like it is for so many other buyers?
Yeah. So again, I think a few things there. Having like the majority of buyers were Dutch. The site was in English, but big portion of the buyer pool was in the Netherlands or foreign. There was a good portion, let's say like 15 to 20% that were in the US, but that's the things that we loved about this business is the more we dug, the more layers we unraveled was like, oh my God, there's so many opportunities because the person who built the business, a very talented developer, really passionate about this niche, but he was a developer and wasn't a marketer and didn't really see kind of all the flaws in like the process. So that's where like a lot of the opportunities came in where it's like, okay, oh, it's only Netherlands, it's a foreigner. Well, what are the opportunities to expand globally or into the US, right? So we
Right.
kind of saw that as more of an opportunity than, oh, there's not many US customers. Okay, well, let's figure out a way to get more of the US customers there. So that's been like a huge thing is I think our lens was just a little bit different than other buyers on this type of deal. And that's kind of I think why we were able to structure it. I think talking about the deal structure is also kind of creative. At least that's part of the thing that I love is we were able to structure an earnout, about $90,000 earnout, and we essentially got the business for 225 upfront, $90,000 earnout, but we tied the earnout with certain stipulations. And the reason we did this is because it's a fairly complicated software tool. The person had spent 10 years building it, right? So
Right.
only him. And we're like, we want you to agree to at least 5 to 10 different changes that you'll kind of implement over the next 2 to 3 months. So that was a creative deal structure because it was a win-win for him. He was walking away with a great price and was ready to just kind of, move on, exit the business, walk away with a good chunk. And essentially, he decided to walk away from the earnout, which is fairly rare considering it was about a couple months of work. The reason that he decided to do this because he just had a kid, just started his new
Mm.
family. He really just, after 10 years, I think it becomes fairly emotional where people just they want a clean exit and they
Get
don't want to
away
even
from me.
spend. Yeah. So he had walked away from the earnout. I think partially it was that. And then after he had agreed to some of the stipulations, I think he realized that it was a little bit out of his comfort zone because we were completely transitioning over to Stripe, which he didn't have much experience with Stripe development.
Mm.
So in the end, like month one, this business netted like over 100K with the earnout being canceled, with like the profit of the business. So it was like huge thing. It's just like, imagine your whole mortgage got canceled, or a big portion of it, like 30%. So it was like a huge win for us. But as we were having this, we're like, hey, did you talk to your partner? Did you sleep on this? Did you like,
Like, how many
we didn't want
shares?
him to like make an
You don't
impulse
want to make
decision
money.
here. So yeah, it was kind of wild for us when we are going through it, but we're like, hey, take a few days, talk to everyone who's involved on your side, make sure that this is the direction. And they came back, signed like addendum to the APA, and we were able to move forward. So in general, yeah, it worked out great. But I think those creative deal structures can work out well. It was kind of a win-win scenario. So we got all the changes we wanted to get done, or we got the 90K, right?
That's amazing, man. Talk to me a little bit. I want to talk about the. Oh, actually, let's go there right now. So the money you did pay, a little over 200K that you mentioned, was that like all personal war chest with you and your partner, or did you finance some of that deal? Like, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's just pretty easy split, two people, 50% in. So makes it an easy 50-50 partnership, which outside of that, it can get a little complicated.
Yes, that's why I was curious. And on your partnership, when you brought your friend in into the deal, like how did you guys decide what the priorities would be, like how this partnership will play out? Because that's a big thing a lot of people don't really consider when they get into bed with each other a bit, right?
Yeah, we just kind of looked at like what are our core strengths, and like some of the stuff that we would do together and some of the stuff that he would do on his own. So he has a lot of more experience with SEO. He has like a ton of, I guess, levers he can pull from that industry. Having his own agency, we can get certain things at cost or for very cheap.
Yeah.
So that was kind of his realm, or like my realm was a little bit more handling dev, handling a little bit more of like the CRO initial changes. And so, yeah, it was kind of like maybe at some point it's like a 70-30% operator, but then it, pivots back when we're doing new projects. So now it's kind of like, what are one or two big things we want to focus on each quarter? And we kind of divide them up, like what's going to be the best way for us to do this. So as of now, yeah, after all the initial dev change, it's kind of been a fairly passive thing where we have a few contractors and developers working for us, but it's all basically per hour, where we don't have these huge high like recurring cost.
That's amazing, man. Very good acquisition. In terms of the $90,000 in free money, like on one hand, that sounds pretty good to me. But on the other hand, like was that a difficult transition to find a developer to come in and like, hey, I have no idea what this code stack even is. Could you figure it out for me and make these changes? Like, how did that go?
Yeah, so I would say it wasn't an easy dev project. I would say it was like definitely one of those things where I'm like, hey, this should take at the least 3 months. It should be fairly straightforward, because it was just, getting Stripe integration set up. And a lot of my experiences with WordPress or Shopify, and like doing anything along those lines is very easy. But with a custom app, it does take longer, and you really have to find the right developer. So, yeah, as far as the development stuff, it took a little bit longer. It cost about what we expected. I would say in hiring developers, what I've seen at least is they can really like overpromise in the beginning, and you just don't really know like what's going to go on. And what we saw working best was like getting an estimate for a certain project. So like really having a clear map of what you need, getting a time estimate, and then just saying, hey, let's set a maximum budget on this, because that kind of just gets both people in line. Some of the smaller projects, it's best to just stick hourly. But I do think there's kind of like this weird sort of thing you need to do where like get an estimate, figure out a max number of hours that's going to play into it. And then that way, if it takes longer, you're not really going over your anticipated budget. So,
Yeah, with hiring developers, it's like always budget for twice as long of time as they initially stay, and like at least
yeah.
20% more in cost. Like bake that in because of the overpromising. But yeah, I feel you. One of my friends is going through that right now with a scraper, which he didn't overestimate what they were telling him. So now he's in the like what's going on phase of the development.
Yeah, I would say like with development, it can be one of these things where like I would say early on you really need to, if anything goes wrong, you just need to like fix it as soon as possible. But what can happen is like, especially if you're building a custom app or something, is you get so deep into it that you're like, okay, well, now this person, it took them 2 months or 3 months to get to here. The learning curve would be so high to go and hire another developer. So you get into this like really weird space, but I think that's why it is so important to like make sure you really interview a lot of people, make sure you structure it in the right way, and just like find that win-win deal structure for both sides, kind of like what you need to do with when you're buying it or selling a
Yeah,
business, right?
this is a bit of a rabbit hole we're going down, but I'm curious of did you have that developer like write out like maybe the seller had it, but like the code, like in terms, I'm forgetting the exact word for it, the document of code that explains what everything is for the next developer to come in and look at it. There's a
Oh,
term for it, but I'm forgetting it.
honestly, this seller is one of the most impressive sellers I've ever seen. He had over 200 pages of
Oh
documentation
wow.
on like just to give to our developers. How does the backend office work? How do you update the SSL? Like there was a 3-page process for that. So like all of that is in like one document, and like this document has like 25 different versions of it. That's how like good of a seller he was. And again, for any people listening, like if you really want to be appealing to a buyer, like that's the type of seller where they have everything like that kind of in a documentation. Like our first like training call, he had like slides, like to show our developers and stuff. So that was another thing that was pretty much included. Since it was a complex deal, we agreed to 60 days of training. And again, we also structured what does that 60 days look like? Like, I think it's not a good idea to leave it vague in an APA. And in the agreement, we're like, we essentially agreed to a certain number of hours of training. It didn't expire after 60 days, but essentially, there was a little bit of details like how many hours per week, if we don't use them in that 60 days, how long can they extend? So I think having that and having like the expectations just super clear from both ends is just going to like be really good, right? Because they have the money held up in escrow. So if they don't meet the training, then they're really incentivized to actually show up and do that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. For, any SaaS entrepreneur out there listening to this, like having that kind of documentation is super crucial. At least if you want to sell to a non-technical buyer, which I would assume you consider yourself in that category for the most part.
Yeah, I'm a technical, non-technical buyer, like meaning I don't know any coding languages. I don't code. I just like I've built multiple WordPress websites, Shopify. Like, so I have some technical skills. I can do like really light, coding, and now with GPT can figure out some small stuff. But like, this is way beyond that, right? Like, way beyond my skill set. So,
I remember our mutual friend John, when he worked underneath me, he was so technical, right? And we hired this agency to do like closed loop analytics with us. They started talking to John and me about it, like what they're going to do. And I like messaged John on Slack, like, hey man, are you following any of this? He's like, no, dude, this is way over my head. Like, okay, well, at least we hired good people.
yeah,
We both have no idea what's going on. But yeah, like proper documentation, if you want to sell to non-technical buyers, super, super crucial. That training, what you mentioned, super crucial in a deal, like being clear on that. Because like if you're not clear on that, the seller could be like, yeah, I gave you training. I sent you the documentation. That's the training. Like you gave me
right.
the earnout, right? Keeping it specific, super, super important. Backing out of the operational stuff, and we'll get back into some of the changes you made as well, but going back into the actual deal when you were looking at buying this deal, how did you go about doing the due diligence process? Now, you mentioned you had a student that was using your acquisition services. So, talk to me what that due diligence process looked like that the student was doing and what you did, because the student makes you fall in love with the business at the end of the day, right? By bringing it to you.
Well, I had brought the deal to the student because
Oh,
it
did
fell
you?
in their
Right.
yeah, it fell in their range of like what they're looking for. And essentially that's part of the program is I help find the deal, help them with due diligence. And my due diligence kind of approach is to break it down into different categories, right? So there's the financial due diligence, like going through line by line. Why is this month so high? Like the traffic doubled this month. Why didn't the revenue double? And then essentially just looking for those discrepancies. And that's a big important part is like any discrepancies you see, jotting those down to ask the seller questions, because it could be, oh yeah, our traffic doubled, but our processor was broken this month, or we did a sale where we had 50% off. So like the traffic doubled, but we made, the same number of revenue, right? So
Yeah.
there is a lot of things, and it's super important where you need to find these discrepancies and you need to see how the seller is able to handle them. Because I've spoken to some sellers and they have no idea. They also just like kind of are dismissive of the question sometimes. And so I'm like, man, that just really goes against my gut feeling. But when I'd spoken to this seller, he was able to answer everything, every discrepancy. And so to break it down simply is like we're looking at SEO, doing an audit of the SEO, the backlinks, the traffic. So SEO and traffic auditing, financial auditing, and then just like, does the product, is it good? What are some of the opportunities? And that's the other part of due diligence is like, I'm looking for potential issues, but I'm also looking for potential opportunities. Like, what are they doing that just isn't working well? And maybe that's a good segue into like what were some of the low hanging fruits or changes that we were able to make to this business.
Yeah, let's get into it because there's one in particular, if I'm remembering it correctly, that I think is kind of hilarious for a SaaS. So go take it away. Talk to me about
Yeah.
the low hanging fruit that you saw and what you did post acquisition with those fruit.
Yeah, so a lot of things I actually learned from my first acquisition is just like, what are these really easy things? I want to go in and instantly be able to change stuff that's going to have a big impact. So on this business and my prior acquisitions is they hadn't tested prices at all. So I'd ask them, what price points did you test? How did you get to these price points? And like, why did you make it this price, right? Both of the sellers on the past deals, they hadn't tested any prices. They just kind of came up with a number or base it off of competition or similar like products out there. So for 10 years, this person had never changed the prices. It's used by universities, schools who don't care really because they're just expensing it. So that was the first like low hanging fruit. Okay, they haven't tested prices. I think over 10 years, just with inflation, we can really ramp up the prices. The second big thing was the onboarding process was extremely clunky. So to actually buy the product, you would be on the website, you would go through a like multiple checkouts, you would put in like 30 different fields of information, which was completely unnecessary. So we just got rid of all those fields. We simplified the checkout into like a 3-step checkout process where we're collecting the email if they abandon cart. We're doing like some of those best practices, but we just made it a lot simpler, a lot easier, a lot more impactful. On the old checkout process, you would get to the end, and I think it's wild, but you would get to the end, and instead of putting in your credit card details or whatever, they would send you an email, a payment link to your email. You'd have to go to your email, click it, open it back up another sort of external website or sort of payment processor, enter in then, and then you would have to like get another email to like get logged back in. It was just like the most clunky, checkout process. I'm like, this is terrible. So that was the one big thing, improving the checkout process. And while we did this, they were doing a one-time fee for both of these software. It was a one-time fee. This one, you got sent reminders every year, but it didn't automatically update. So that was a huge thing. We're like, we'll switch to Stripe. We'll get people on a monthly or yearly recurring. So that way it just automatically recurs. They don't have to go through this clunky process of renewing. Some people were sending bank transfers and stuff. So it was just really complicated for no reason, right?
Yeah, that was the thing that blew my mind away when you and I were talking about this deal, a SaaS with no MRR, basically, because they didn't have anyone on a recurring billing. And maybe that was 10 years ago, maybe that was like less common, I guess, but
Right.
I don't think it was super uncommon even back then. But yeah, wild. People having to pay manually every month.
Yeah. So those were the big, like, kind of, okay, we can get this done like with dev in a month, right? We can make these changes. The other big one was the way their plans were structured. You like kind of needed a spreadsheet to figure out which plan was good for you. It was so complicated to figure out, okay, do I want plan A, B, or C? Okay, this one includes 3 groups. And then on this one, I pay per group, but it's like this price. So it's just really complicated. And like, I think in general, like, you don't want to confuse people. They should be able to tell which plan is clear for them within like 5 seconds. So we completely redrafted and reorganized like the pricing page, the kind of structure of like what's included, some of like the better benefits for the bigger packages. And we essentially increased the prices quite a bit, but also gave people a discount if they did yearly. So it's up to 30% discount if they do yearly. If they don't want yearly, they can do monthly. And all of our monthly plans are like, you know, they have like a really clear avatar in mind on who this monthly plan is for, because we have students and we have schools, right? So students are going to be a little bit more price conscious than a university who's getting this expense like, reimbursed by the university, right?
Yeah. That's still blowing my mind about the MRR thing, but you did other stuff too outside of that. And I think simplifying, the actual offer into simpler terms, that makes a lot of sense. But then you and your partner did some crazy stuff, right? Like you guys went pretty hard on the SEO front. So talk to me a little bit about what you did there.
Yeah, so I'm not super like, I wouldn't consider myself an SEO, but more of like a full stack marketer that has some SEO knowledge. But as far as the SEO
I too
play,
am a false SEO.
yeah, the black hat, the black shirt
For
SEO.
people just listening to the podcast, I'm wearing a shirt that says SEO right now.
So yeah, as far as the SEO strategy was, is like, hey, we have like so many different countries that we're not getting traffic in, and we have other countries that we're getting some traffic in, but we're just not converting, or we're just not able to like really get them to the checkout pages and stuff. So we had like translated the site into 60 different languages. That was a huge kind of SEO project. But the cool thing about this business is it has so much authority in the space that it ranks pretty well. So we didn't need to do much backlinking or anything. There's just like it's being used and backlinked by a ton of universities in their curriculum. So we just kind of focused on like what are some of these low hanging blog posts? What are some of these like keywords that we can rank for pretty easily? And then we got all of that up and running, the 60 different languages translated, and then also like doing like exit intents to get a free like download for people to get them on our email list. I would say like the abandoned card is probably one of the best performers, where on step one we just capture their email before they go to step two, and we're able to send them through an email campaign. So it's just kind of a lot of these things. We're like focusing on things that kind of sound simple, but can have a huge impact on the traffic and kind of the conversions of the actual business.
Yeah, well, I love that you focused on price first because, except for my affiliate friends, which nowadays I tell my affiliate friends to move up the revenue food chain, anyways. But like that seems to me always the simplest thing to go after, and no one does it, right? They'll like maybe they'll play with the price once when they start the business, like this guy, or maybe if they buy the business, they might test a new price once and then never do anything again with it, right? Like, but that is just pure margin that you create, like out of thin air by knowing like where the market is actually willing to pay, right? Like to me, that should always be the number one. But yeah, all these other things you did, they add up, right? Like you increase the price, you increase the traffic, you increase the conversion, and you made it all easier to use, plus the rebilling. Like these, like 4 or 5 things add up to massive growth. So you've owned the business now for what, like 2 years?
It's just a little bit over a year. I guess would
A
be
little over a year.
a little bit over a year. I think we bought it in October, but like with the kind of the transfer process, the migration, I don't think we even like had the payments transferred over until like February. So we're coming up on like a year, probably like got all of the dev changes like midsummer last year. So we're like not even a year of like reaping all of the changes we've
Oh
made.
wow.
So like we're coming in like our first month, like our lowest month, we already 4x'd the revenue and profit. So overall, like it's a huge signal that like what the changes we made are like going in the right direction. So yeah, overall it's still pretty fresh, but yeah, the first kind of like instances of it, like every way we look at it for the past year and the past 2 years, we're really outperforming at least 2 to 4x like the previous year on the P&L.
I can see it now already, Swig. after this podcast, I'll go on to Trustpilot and I'll see I bought a business from Empire Flippers and I 4x the revenue. Mike Swig, 5 stars. I'm looking forward to that review, my friend.
Yeah. No, I'm down. I'm already know what I'm gonna say. So yeah, I have nothing
Link
but
back to the spaghetti article that you and I created, just completely out of context.
yeah. So I do think there's a lot to that. I think a lot of it is just being able to match up the right business at the right time with the right people. And again, that is a little bit more complicated, but if you can do it, it could be one of the best investments you ever make, right? And
Oh
that's
yeah.
why I think this industry is very unique. There's a lot of nuances to it, but if you know what you're doing, you can have a really good acquisition, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think like sellers, selling a business is good. Like it's a good exit payday, good liquidity event. But to me, real wealth is buying businesses. Like the product market fit is like the hardest thing, right? 0 to 1
Yeah.
in a lot of ways is like the hardest part of starting or running a business at all. Like just finding people who will actually give you money when you have nothing, right? So like starting from a good foundation, like what you did with the SaaS, and to your point, like the guy who ran it for 10 years, like he's probably a bit myopic. Like he's just like too in the weeds to see the bigger picture anymore and just
Right.
not there anymore. He's burnt out on the project. He's onto other stuff. As you mentioned, he started a family, right? So like a savvy buyer can come in and do all these like what arguably are pretty simple changes, but no one ever thinks about. And it just creates magic, like magic out of thin air, as our mutual friend Ace Chapman would say, money out of thin air.
Yeah. No, it is definitely wild. Yeah, and like being able to kind of okay, I did this once with a smaller business, like just doubling down on like all the skill sets and like, everyone thinks they're a great marketer, but it's like, okay, let's put it to the test again and again and again. Like let's just keep doubling down and again just like reinvesting into yourself, right? Like I think there's a lot into that is like it can be hard to take that gamble on yourself, but relatively speaking, it can really pay off, right?
Oh, absolutely, man. It's really cool seeing the evolution of the swig as you go about this. So, I mean, with everything that's happened with this business, I want to move on to some of your other businesses here too, because I know you have a bunch of different things going on. But to wrap up this section, so you mentioned you and your partner are now focusing on like 1 or 2 things per quarter to move the business ahead. Tell me a bit about what you think the next phases for this business is and maybe what your end goal in mind with it is.
Yeah, so I would say the big focuses now is figuring out why and what countries are converting and why are some countries not converting. Is it because the language translations aren't good? Is it because the pages aren't, optimized in a certain area? Like for example, we just saw today that Germany is having like way lower on-site time, right, than compared to any other country. So figuring out, okay, let's look at the heat maps on what's going on with Germany. Like, why are these people not
Why did the
converting?
Germans hate us?
It could just be something that's broken on the German translation,
Yeah.
right? It could be like the button to check out is broken. So going a little bit deeper there and like getting the right people who understand Google Tag Managers and like all the heat mapping stuff on board to kind of look at that stuff is really great. The other big impact is like we've done a little bit of the initial like abandoned cart, exit intent pop-ups, some of that stuff, but that's kind of like phase 1. Let's test it, see if it's working, and then segment it a little bit more. So, for example, we have it in Dutch and English now, these email workflows, but a lot of Dutch people, like 80 to 90%, speak English pretty fluently, right? But for Spanish speaking countries, some of them can be as low as 5%
Yeah.
native or fluent speakers. So if they're getting emails in English, they're going to have a lot lower conversion rate. So doing a lot of stuff like that where it's like, hey, we tested this, the exit intent's working, the email sequences are working. How can we double down? How can we extend on that? And then we have a huge database of people that were on this like only free subscription, and so how can we kind of get those people back re-engaged? That was another thing we did is we got rid of our free trial subscription and there was a plan that was just a free version, right? And instead of getting rid of that, we decided to just make all of our plans have a 14-day free trial. And the reason behind that was this free version only did 10% of what the product did. It didn't give a
Mm.
good sort of overview of the potential of what you would actually experience. So that's why we transitioned to a free 14-day trial, and that's had a lot higher, conversion rate as well. So one of the big things that I kind of didn't mention earlier. So as far as like moving forward, I would say like just figuring out, we're getting a ton of traffic. How can we convert more of this traffic? And like that's kind of our one big thing over the next few quarters.
That's awesome. Yeah. What was I going to say on that? The workflows. That's amazing. You have that in place in 60 different languages as well. So the whole back end workflows.
So right now the front end is translated into like 16 different languages. The back end is about, I think, 60
Oh,
as far as like the software. So yeah, it's like it is pretty wild, right?
yeah, that is a big project. But yeah, to your other point, getting rid of the free plan where you're only showing 10% of the features, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like you want to make you want the free to feel so good that they feel like guilty not paying you, right? Like,
Exactly.
so yeah,
Yeah.
I'm right with you on that. So is your ultimate plan to flip it, or are you like gonna like utilize this to grow into something even bigger? Like what's your exit plan with the business, or is there not one?
Yeah, so we're definitely trying to build it in a more sellable way. Like we've done a few things that like we went from including VAT and taxes to now we're changing where we're charging taxes. So that's like an extra 20%. And then we're doing a little bit of tax restructuring where since we're working with a lot of universities and schools, they're actually, VAT exempt where, we can actually structure the taxes in a way where we can save another 20% on taxes. So we can
Mm,
charge taxes and then on certain cases not have to pay that 20% of VAT. So those little things add up. That could be an extra
yeah.
40% just by a few changes to the product and to like kind of the company structure. So that's kind of another big thing we're working on over the next quarter. And all of these things are just going to make it a more sellable business. But as far as like us, I think it's growing at a pace where it wouldn't make sense for us to sell it now. In the future, it might, but it's a fairly evergreen industry. And then if we sell it, we're like, okay, now what do we do to find that cash flow or to replicate that cash flow? That's fairly passive, right? So we'll have to come to that bridge, if it ever happens, but definitely something that I think is on the books, but it's like maybe 3 or 4 years away from even considering it.
Makes sense. And of course, if you need to replace the cash flow, once you sell the business with me again, I'll be happy to let you buy another business from the
Yeah,
marketplace. I can easily replace the cash flow for you, my friend. Just keep
yeah, I
spending
think
the
it's
liquidity over and over again. It's asset flywheel.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think like, yeah, from like an exit, it would really have to make sense, like, when you consider what multiple you sell at, with the taxes involved, with brokering
Yeah.
fees, like, what does that look like? What are you walking away with? And then of that amount, probably stacking, portion into savings, but then reinvesting. It really needs the math needs to add up to make sense. And right now, I see a lot of opportunities to buy more
Oh yeah.
businesses. So I'd say like probably going to be doing another buyer acquisition by the end of the year, but we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, with the growth that you're seeing, it's not even a full year with everything you've done with it. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if you could sell that business for close to, multiple seven figures, like maybe like 2 million or a little bit above 2 million, something like that down in a few years, right? So that makes complete sense to me. And good job dodging my hard sell on there. If you didn't know, Swig, I only invite people on this podcast for me to publicly hard sell them on Empire Flippers. So good work
You
on
don't need to hard sell me. I've seen behind the scenes of Empire Flippers. Like, I also think that kind of gave me a competitive advantage in a way
well,
because
for
I
sure.
know
Yeah.
I know how the system works. I know who like works in what department, and I'm able to. I wouldn't say that it gives me any unfair advantage. It gives me an advantage, right? Because I just know how the whole process works really well. And I would say like knowing that gave me a little bit of an upside to like structure a really good deal, really kind of like understand the whole process. So
Well, yeah, I mean, like to your point, it's not an unfair advantage, but you get the advantage as if you have bought many businesses already, in a sense, right?
yeah.
Like for me, like I've now overseen like 2,000 transactions on the marketplace, right? Like I see, like I'm able to look at a business model and see the more the blue oceans, like the pivots, right? Versus like our SEO affiliate friends, like that's all they were for so long till AI came and woke them up a little bit, right? They were just like Amazon affiliate site on WordPress, Amazon affiliate website on WordPress, and like that was it. They would never expand their horizons. But like you and me, like we've seen so many crazy deals over the years, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, it gives you a massive leg up, but not any bigger leg up than someone who's bought a lot of businesses already. It's just like kind of like a cheaper way of getting the skill set, I guess.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I completely agree.
So, Matt, we're coming close to the end of the podcast, but before we get into the rapid fire questions, I did want to ask you like just a bit of like your portfolio because I see you're posting Instagram shots, all that kind of good stuff, the swig influencer that you are, but I know you have like multiple little businesses in the pot. So, talk to me a little bit about what other businesses you got going on outside of just the SaaS business.
Yeah, so I would say the easiest way it summarizes down is I have my portfolio of software businesses, and then I have like global career, which is like this umbrella. And the three pillars of global career are remote working, freelancing, and then entrepreneurship. And then under entrepreneurship, there's the acquisition program that I help first time buyers with. I help sellers who are looking to sell their business. And it's kind of people like, hey, what direction should I go in? How should I prepare my business? And from the buyer side, I have never bought an online business. I don't know much, but I have this unique skill set in my career. How can I translate that over? So they just need a little bit more hand holding. It's kind of like before they even get to a brokerage, they
Yeah,
need somebody else who has that confidence and structure to help them with that. And then in the freelancing side, we have, it's called Copy Sharks. It's basically a video program and a program that helps people make money with freelance writing. And essentially, we saw like a huge gap in the market where people want to make money, they want to have a side hustle, they don't want to get another remote job. Entrepreneurship is just a little too scary for them. So they kind of need that middle stepping stone between them, which is freelancing. And Americans have been, honing in the skill of writing for pretty much their whole life. So there's not a huge learning curve. And if you are able to do some other things well, you can actually get up and running pretty quick. Like we've had students land, $80 to $100 per hour writing jobs within, 2 weeks of finishing the program. So there's a lot of like, I guess, opportunities, but I would say that's kind of where a lot of my active time is now, is like building up a small team, trying to become this like really good alternative to, get up and running, building people's like own sort of side hustle.
very cool. I'm assuming it's focusing mostly on copywriting then, right? Like I mean, copy sharks kind of is in the name, but yeah, like actual sales copy, right? Not just like content, blogs, that kind of stuff.
So we're doing a lot of like freelance writing, which
Mm.
we start them off with like kind of general SEO blog writing and then work up to like some kind of like sales copy, but it's not super in depth direct response. The reason we haven't gone that route is because we see a little bit of a gap between well spoken and well written Americans who can write at that higher level. So like a little bit more college educated who can work, who have some sort of skill set. For example, they had a finance background or they had, a tech background or a medical background. We're able to help those people who are looking to like semi retire into making like, okay, they don't want to work 60 hours a week. They want to semi retire into something they can do 10 to 20 hours. They can do it on their own terms and they can do it from home. So it answers and checks all those boxes where
Interesting.
I think a lot of other programs are like, okay, direct response copywriting, we're going to show
Get
you how to
Lambos
do this.
today.
Kind of, yeah, where it's just like it's a lot where they're like reaching out to people, sending emails where like most of the people they don't want to do that, right? Or like at least our audience. So it's a little bit of a different sort of niche within the writing industry, but
Bit of an older demographic than I imagine who are students of the course.
yeah. Yeah, usually a little bit older. So
Nice. That's
it's
a cool gap. I didn't realize that. But I was going to say, like, to me, and I'm sure you probably agree with me on this, but like from one marketing nerd to another marketing nerd, I think copywriting is like the most important thing. And my secret addiction is reading direct response copywriting. It's the dark lords of marketing. So
I mean, I love seeing some of this like older like the OG direct response before even like TV was around. Like people
Oh,
were
those are the
using it, and
best. Yeah, like, when they're doing, direct mail and all the other
oh yeah,
agencies, they, like, look down their nose at direct mail copywriters, but direct mail copywriters always made more than, like, anyone else combined.
yeah, it is a wild rabbit hole, and I think a lot of it just like stems from like human psychology, like how do people kind of relate, how do people make their decision making process, and like what sort of levers or strings can you pull on with words, like to ethically, and in some cases people using it unethically, right,
Yeah,
to get people
yeah.
to buy
It's a
something.
double-edged sword, right? You understand marketing, you can build a nation or destroy a nation. The choice is yours.
Yeah.
But before we get into the rapid fire section, I did want to ask you a question on just time productivity that you're doing. Like, you have a lot of different things going on at any given time. For listeners out there who are also maybe managing multiple businesses, or maybe they're losing their hair just trying to do one, like, what's your advice on productivity to help them out?
Yeah, so I would say like what I do as far as my workflow is, I do like the typical yearly, quarterly goals, but I would say the big thing is I like break those down into smaller chunks. I have like a spreadsheet. I use Trello, so find some sort of like organization thing. Like I moved from Notes to Trello, and it's just been a huge game changer. So like,
Like the Notes app on your iPhone?
yeah,
Oh
yeah,
my
for
god,
just
dude.
like, yeah.
What are you doing with yourself, Swig? Notes.
Well, I don't know. I think it was working, but it wasn't optimal, right? Like I think a lot of these productivity stuff, like if it's just you, like doing a lot of
Yeah,
like the solopreneur, but if you want to move into a team, you need like this productivity thing that can be shared and like organized publicly.
for
So
sure.
I
And
would
like
say
what
like,
you use is what is best at the end of the day. Like my friends who always try to convince me on Notion, right? Like I love
yeah,
Notion. I think it's really cool, but it's so complex to like have to set everything up from out of the gate versus like Monday or Trello is like it's already done for you. You don't have to think about it, right? So yeah,
yeah. That's kind of why I got with Notes, because it syncs, it integrates, it's easy. I always have it with me in my pocket. That was kind of why I did it. And like now I have to stop myself. I'm like, no, I need to put this in Trello. And even like I start writing a note, I'm like, no, I need to like, okay, I'll copy it into Trello right
uh,
away instead of like,
dude, I remember when I'll have to message her because and tell her that we talked about her, so that way she has to listen to the very end of this podcast to the point where I mentioned her. But when we hired Sarah, like she was using, I think it was that forgetting the app is a really famous like note.
Todoist.
What is it?
Todoist or Evernote, probably.
It was Evernote. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
her second brain was in Evernote, but we were using Monday, right? So she was like, I'm struggling like keeping both of these up to date. Like, well, why are you updating Evernote? I'm not in
Yeah.
Evernote. Just update Monday.
Yeah.
It's like, but that's how I use it. Like, well, I mean, I don't know how to help you. Like, the team's all on Monday.
Yeah.
Good times. Good times.
I think a lot of that stuff is like it can be super impactful, and like a lot of the productivity things that I've learned have just come from Atomic Habits. So shout out to
Good
that
book.
book. So one thing I do now is like I'll have the quarterly and yearly goals, and then I'll have like kind of the things in Trello. But what I'll do is I'll just write down like my focus for the day, my goals for the day on a note card. I'll have it out. I'll have it by my laptop. So anytime I'm like trying to get distracted or like, what do I work on now? I'm like, oh, here's the note card of the 3 things I need to get done today. And like, typically what I'll do is I'll organize them in the hardest. So that way I like start with the hardest and like work up to a little bit easier things. And then like mentally, I'll also like play kind of games like, okay, if I finish these things, then I can like, watch a Netflix show, or then I can play a video game. But I can't do that until like I finished all 3. So you kind of like gamify it in a sense, and you like have that short term reward a little bit delayed. So I've
Yeah.
noticed like that. And I'm really kind of anti noting and journaling just because I'm like, man, I want this in a digital form. But the actual act of having a physical note card in front of you with the 3 things you need to get done that day is like a game changer, at least for what I've been trying to do. Other productivity stuff, trying to like automate, outsource, delegate, and then hire, and kind of in that order has been like a big productivity hack. Like anything that I was doing myself, like for example, one of the early businesses, because I wanted to stay like a little involved in it, I was doing all the refund requests, and it's about 30 minutes to an hour every month. But I just kept like, I would delay it or I'd like try to stack them up. And I was like, man, why am I doing this? Like, why am I still doing this when my VA like is more than capable to do this?
Dude, those are one of those like small like 5-minute tasks that turn into like 10-hour mental lumps in your head. Like
Yeah.
anything dealing with like, "I'll just sign up for this thing," or "Hey, could you just like send me this link?" Like, yeah, I'll get to it. But for some reason it
Yeah.
annoys me so much more versus like writing like a 10,000 word blog post. Even though I know it's only going to take me like, 5 minutes, but like, nope, I'll do it after this blog post or whatever. Right? Just
Yeah.
like it bothers me with that. So yeah, good advice. I mostly follow very similar rules. It's a very fantastic way to gamify. All right, man. So we're in the wrap up section. We're in the rapid fire section. I'm going to ask you three questions. You give me three short but great answers. Are you ready, my friend?
Ready when you are.
All right, man. What are the best hidden growth opportunities that you see in online business right now?
So the hidden growth opportunities I see, I kind of mentioned them earlier, but that 500K to 750K range of online businesses seems to be like no man's land because solopreneurs, it's too big. Portfolio buyers, it's too small. So in this space, you can really find some sellers that are a little bit more motivated. They're up to like doing seller financing, creative deal structures. And again, I think software in general is like the niche that I like the best for a number of different reasons.
Yeah, great answer. I agree. That orphan tier is fantastic for buyers that know what they're doing. What tools or resources can people use so they can become more of a nomadic online business owner? What would you recommend?
So I would say like there's a ton of great books. I have a reading list on my site that kind of goes through some of the best like books that I enjoy. Globalcareerbook.com, you can find it there. But as far as like tools and resources, it really depends on what industry you're in. I love this new software called Rise for productivity. I use Google for everything, for docs, for sharing, Trello for staying organized. And, that's kind of the main ones that you really need. Like there's the telecom stuff like Slack that I use and then Zoom. So I'd say like between those apps, like that's kind of the big ones. And then I use ChatGPT like every single day just
Same.
for if you're not using it, you're just like really missing out. Like there's so many ways that it can be integrated to like every business.
Yeah, I think a lot of this audience are SEOs, right? And like they just think it's for content creation. And while it is useful if you do it right, like I think that's such like the lowest level of its use, right? Like just there's
Yeah,
just
I
so
agree.
many things I use it for outside of content creation.
Yeah, I use it every day and it's like a lot of it's not even content creation. It's just like, hey, look at these data points, what am I missing out on? Like do a big data analysis and it's really impressive what it can do if you give it the right prompts and kind of
Yeah.
understand. But there's a learning curve to it. It's like anything, it takes time.
You're using it for actual productive stuff. I'm just having Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft talk about existentialism to me. So that's how you know we're not the same, Swig.
That also seems like a good use.
Dude, this is a tangent, but I thought it was very funny. I trained one of my ChatGPT chats to always talk like Edgar Allan Poe and to pretend it is Edgar. And I forgot I was in that chat, so I asked a business question about like CRO or something like that. And Edgar Allan Poe comes up, quote the Ravens. Yeah, like just starts going into this whole poem about doing CRO from like the fall of the House of Usher. Like, oh my god, how do I
That's
switch
amazing.
this?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's great.
Yes. My final question for you, my friend, and the most important of the rapid fire questions. What has been your funniest moment when it comes to working in online business?
Funniest moment, man, that's tough. I don't know. Trying to think. Any hints of stuff that's happened with us?
Well, it definitely has to involve us. I'm a pretty funny
Okay,
guy.
fast food spaghetti, the blog of doing fast food spaghetti, where we were hungover, walking around Manila, literally going to like 5 or 6 like fast food shops to try and document like we're taking photos and like there is an actual blog post reviewing the best fast food spaghetti. And I would say that was like a really funny, just kind of like, I don't know, something that I really enjoyed and had a good laugh doing it.
Yeah, that was probably the most painful way to recover from a hangover as well, because that spaghetti was absolutely disgusting. Like every
Yeah.
one of them was so bad. We'll link to that blog post if you send it over to Lauren. We'll put it into the show notes if anyone wants to read it. But I have the best quote in that blog. It was a collab piece between Swig and me. But yeah, that was one of the more hilarious memories I have as well. I think that was like 3 months into EF, and that's when you knew we were true Gemini brothers eating
Yeah, man.
the worst spaghetti in the world together.
We went from living with each other in Saigon to living with each other in Manila, which was a lot of fun both times. Yeah, I mean, I found a photo back from Norfolk Mansion. Dude, it was great memories, trip down memory lane.
Yeah, it's funny. One of our old friends, Jenny, she owns a bar. She was in the personal trainer in Norfolk, right?
Yeah.
She owns a bar now, like down PVC near City Gardens where Justin used to live. I ran into her, like, wait, oh, I know you. It was like so nostalgic.
That's wild, man. Yeah, a lot
Yeah,
of a lot of memories there.
yeah, for sure, man. We'll catch up, not at the expense of the listeners' ears here, but for anyone that wants to pick your brain and follow Swig, Meets World, and everywhere you're going, everything you're doing, where should people follow you?
Yeah, so globalcareerbook.com kind of has like all my social, like all the things that I like mentioned today. So that's the best place. I'm super active on LinkedIn and Instagram, just Mike Swigunski on pretty much every channel out there. YouTube, I'm also is like a big grind, but it's something that I've been really enjoying, just making like video content. And so I've got a ton of videos out there, putting out a video like every day on YouTube, which is pretty fun.
Nice. I feel you on the grind. I actually have to film like 3 videos tomorrow. So I'm right with you on the grind there, buddy. But yeah, we'll link all those links in the show notes if anyone wants to catch up with Swig. And Swig, always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks for coming on. We'll have to do this again soon.
I'm hoping so, Greg. I'm hoping we can do the next one in person.
Let's do it. I'm actually considering renting a small little office tower in my apartment building to create a creator studio because I've always wanted to have like a really decked out office slash man cave. So who knows? Maybe next time we'll do it in Saigon and for my office man cave thing I built.
Awesome, man. Yeah, count me in.
All right, man. Talk to you soon.
See you, Greg. Bye.
There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you inspired at all the different things that are happening in this industry. And of course, if you just want to buy a highly profitable business, you can always go to empireflippers.com/marketplace, or maybe you want to make an exit of your highly profitable business, and you could go to empireflippers.com/sell your site. I've been your host, Greg. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review, give us a like, a follow, share it across social media. Talk to you all soon. See you on the next episode.